Due to technical difficulties, the first half of the chat was lost to the void. That which survives is presented here, for your listening pleasure. Joining progress.
Whatever. But at the same time, if you're going to have that level of realism where, yes, I want you to have hobbies and take up other things, there is some, how are you doing it? So I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a play style thing, because obviously a lot of people are super into crafting, whether it's through experiences in MMORPGs like Warcraft and things like that. It just doesn't so much work for me, because I guess I still feel like my thing is like kind of, I guess, the more old school of sort of the smith that's spent there, years and years and years and years and years, and all they do is this, and so they're able to craft out a magical sword. Not that you can just pop into town after dungeon delving, whatever.
Right. Well, but that makes sense, though. So there's a difference between, I am going to learn to blacksmith and I can now make an S-hook, which apparently is not a hard one to learn how to do, right? Okay, so you learn an S-hook. But that's not the same thing as it's a magical +2 S-hook of bonding or something crazy, right? And that's, I think, what goes back into, it's the same thing with having the 20 drones. There has to be some way to mitigate it so that it's not, I popped into town and now I have a +5 sword.
Yeah,
right?
It comes down to, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to be doing? Do you want to be playing drones, the game, or blacksmithing, the game, or do you want to be out adventuring? Because if you want to be out adventuring, then you're going to have to make that choice.
And like I said, I think that there's some mitigating to it. Like, you could, on the fly, if you got enough things, make the S-hook. And maybe you're using that as part of a pulley system to rig it so that you can move the stone block. But that's not the same as the +5 sword.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy watching Forged in Fire, and I see the stuff that guys are able to.
Oh, no, some of them come up with some crazy cool stuff.
Given the material and stuff, and they're not all full-time blacksmiths. A lot of them are kind of part-timers. But I feel like you have to put that kind of thing in, and I definitely get it for doing like some kind of MacGyver-y stuff. Like, we need to do this. Let me see if I can make a fire, and we'll take these nails that I brought, and we'll turn that into this other thing. But yeah, there is some line that gets crossed. We're going to do that, and then I'm going to go spend 5 minutes around the campfire, and now I have a Vorpal sword. It's kind of like
right. That's the
maybe not.
And I think that there needs to be some, like, it is one thing to say that my cleric is going to learn armor smithing. Okay, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But armor smithing does not imply that it's a +3 chain armor. It doesn't even necessarily imply that it's a masterwork chain armor, right? It just meant that the guy who's watching your horse now has a chain shirt because it took me 3 months to put that together.
Yeah, or I'm able to repair something that we found.
Right.
And now I'm able to
which rounds out your character, gives them some hobby, some other stuff to do in their downtime, which I think is awesome, but without getting to the point that you're overpowering stuff with and now the entire party has +5 chain shirts.
Right.
And we're 3rd level. That's great.
And that's my problem with the whole concept of artificers is, right, that they want to make nukes while they're on the road in the back of a wagon or something.
I don't think I ever read that one, and that one has not yet at least made it out of.
Okay, try that again. I did not.
Oh, you're talking about artificers?
Artificers. Oh, in Pathfinder.
In Pathfinder. Oh, I don't know.
Artificers in Pathfinder, or which game?
I was using it generically for the people who create devices and then use them like spells. They tend to want to make
mad
a nuke
scientists, junkers. Yes. And those I'm dealing with that in 1879 because and I love them, by the way. I love the idea that you have this, artificer, mad scientist who's going to take this random stuff and basically kind of put magic into it and it does something, right? I do. I think that's awesome and cool. But that's supposed to be limited by, is that a spell you actually have or a power you have? Because you shouldn't be able to just do any old random thing in it. You're supposed to still have a set list of things that you can shove into it. At least that's how most of those work. Am I wrong?
Agreed, and it also takes time. And
it takes time.
And I guess I haven't had anyone be happy playing them simply because those constraints make it not feel like what the field they're going for, which is the mad scientist in the back whipping out a solution.
Well, and that's it. So we were having. I told you I run an 1879 game, and we've got a guy who's playing basically the mad scientist, right? And there's another person who's playing a mage. So mages in that take strain. So they don't have like so many spell slots. They take strain. So the idea is that it takes, and I really actually wish more games would have certain penalties. Have you ever tried like sword fighting or boxing or anything where you're doing that type of physical confrontation? That is like draining. There is a reason that matches are, 5-minute rounds. They take a break, they go back in, and sometimes they're only 3 to 7 rounds. Like they'll have a predetermined how many rounds we're going to do this, right? Because I don't care if you're punching people or if you're using the force of your will to shape the universe. That has to be tiring, right? And some games will put the limits on magicians, but they don't seem to put it on fighters. Like, if you think about it, it's a 6-second round, and yeah, most fights don't go past 10 rounds, which is probably for the best. Because if you think about it, swinging that sword around would get really tiring really fast. But so the mage has this limitation by taking strain. It is tiring. It can eventually turn to damage or could kill you or knock you out at least if you go too hard. Shadowrun used to have this thing where you could overcast and literally kill your mage, right? So the weird scientist doesn't have that penalty. They don't take strain. But the difference is that the mage can pull up any of those spells at any given point and cast the spell. Versus the weird scientist who has to have some creation. As limited as that may be, as, limiting as that is, has some sway with the GM, right? But they have to have some sort of creation. Like you have to have built something to put the spell in. And that's why they don't take strain per se, because it takes time. So it makes them really interesting, but they have to be the type of player who wants to think ahead. They have to be building the shield. Because in that last minute fight, trying to put together a shield, by the time you've put it together, the fight's done. So I kind of like that. I think it pushes a more, but not all players like that, thinking ahead kind of crazy side character. But then you're just like, okay, then you get to be the mage, which I think is cool. And I love those options. With some saves to avoid the rabbit hole. Yeah. Grasshopper needs to come play in one of my games. Think we'd get along good. Great. Well, English is hard. I don't English goods.
All right. I got bumped out that time.
I'm sorry. Welcome back.
That's all right. Thank you. One thing I was going to say, I thought what you were saying about the timing issue is interesting because it kind of is that difference between sort of old school wizards and new school wizards insofar as it used to be that you had to of what spells you were going to prepare. Mm-hmm. So it would be amazing when you prepared the right spells and you were on point, and it could be very disappointing if you prepared the wrong spells and you were not as effective.
Things that Andy has learned in her old age. When I was a younger GM, I used to not necessarily make players wizards in specific write out their spell lists, right? I just trusted that they were doing what they were supposed to do and doing it correctly, not a big deal. In my old age, I've gotten much more finicky about that because it turns out that sometimes players do not, they don't always do that.
Yeah. If you were gonna...
And I will still say that if I know the player well enough and I know that they're not doing stuff to be kind of a min-maxing jerk, then I don't worry so much because, like, as a GM, I have enough to do, and I don't like to micromanage character sheets. Like, I got enough trying to run, the weather. I don't need your character sheet on my to-do list, right? But Don,
yep.
What do you think with the idea of the artificer, mad scientist type of thing versus the mages? Like, do you like how that's usually handled with the limitations being something like being able to put together a device and it taking time versus strain, or in some of the games they don't even have that type of limitation. So, but they'll do something like the mages will have spell slots and you can only do so many spells a day, whereas the artificer won't necessarily have that because it's supposed to take time to create the thing. Do you think that that's a good trade? Do you like that? Not like it?
I don't like it because, right, the artificer will tell the party, I need 2 weeks or 6 months, and the party will say, okay, downtime, and just pay to live while they wait for him to do it. So I don't think it's a real limitation.
I don't know. Like, I've never had a party willing to sit and wait 2 months. I've had a party willing to, like, get a wagon and be like, well, you keep working in the back there while they keep moving forward. But it also goes into can the artificer in the game you're playing create on the fly? And if they can, like, so with what I'm doing with 1879 and how things are done, it is harder to create something on the fly, and it doesn't tend to work as well, and it won't necessarily hold up long term. Like, it may be a one shot. Like, it did the one thing, and it held up for 5 seconds, but that's what you get for trying to make it in the hull of a cave, right?
So I've never played 1879, but I've had a similar mechanic.
So yeah, I was wondering, I mean, with that, so they could do something on the fly, which puts them less out of, because there's the comparison with, like, say, the stupid drones, right? If you had to build all the drones, unless they built them all before they got into the game, the time that would take, right? So I can see kind of what you're saying in that. How do you get the party to sit there for 6 months?
Agreed.
So do you like the idea of, like, the harder, more penalties to doing it on the fly as an alternate option? Good, bad? What do you think?
I prefer doing it on the fly to using time as a limiting factor, because it really generally isn't. The party makes it possible, or the GM will say, yeah, you did that before you started.
But then there's no penalty for them as far as strain or anything like that, or limit to how many they can do. So how do you balance it with other types of magic? Or do you not worry about it?
I let someone else do that, because the artificer, because of I've got a blacksmith set up in the back of the wagon, and while we're rolling to the battle, I'm creating machine guns type of player. I really don't use them in my games, no matter what the game system is. But I have a former player that's with the DM now, that creates these classes for every edition of D&D. And he's got them for second forward. Third was where he really grew up, and he's tried various ways to limit it, and every time it hasn't played really well.
See, I've been on both sides. I've been as the GM dealing with it, and I've been as a player playing. And it was a lot of fun. It was actually, and yes, I know I love Deadlands. I still admit to adoring Deadlands. But it was the post-apocalyptic Hell on Earth, so it's the future one. I was playing a junker. And sometimes my junker would come up with stuff that there's just no way to get the stuff and the parts and the time for. And she would be absolutely unhelpful to anybody else in the party because she's off doing something crazy. As a player, I don't mind the fact that my character is not the center of attention and isn't even involved in a situation sometimes. Like, I like to play, I guess they call them what do they call them these days? Support characters. I like to play support characters sometimes. But she would also come up with crazy things like, oh, we have to try to stop this army. Well, so she's going to create a giant lawnmower. And the lawnmower is going to have these blades. And the blades are going to spin around. And it will roll over their army and, like, chew them all up into little pieces. And if you're going to do that, then what you really need is we need a seed spreader. Because that's kind of like fertilizer. So we'll make this giant lawnmower. And we'll cut them all up. And then we'll put seeds down, and then, yay, we'll plant flowers or something. And they had a few days, but she managed to pull off creating 2 of these things. Like, they were never going to run after, so many hours. It was only going to work for so long. And she did get a seed spreader put on this thing, which was actually a horrible idea. And out of character, I totally was just like, oh my God, I can't believe you're going to let her get away with that, because that's a horrible idea. Because those things are like irradiated mutant monsters that she's now trying to grow flowers in. Like, that's totally a bad plan later. And of course the GM's giggling because, yeah, of course that's a horrible plan. Irradiated garden, right? But it's hilarious and great story fodder. So, but I always had liked it takes up time, because then I'm not coming up with something. I mean, of all of the characters, technically my character sort of killed the most out of the army, did the most damage to this army, because she's sitting around with these stupid lawnmower things, like directing them off of a little, old school control, video game controller, running them around at people like a gleeful 6-year-old who should never have been allowed to do any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
However, at the same time, that's because we had enough advance notice that she could pull it off. There's been plenty of times where, great, you came up with this fabulous solution. You worked on it the whole time that the party's actually dealing with the problem. And if we ever come across that exact same problem again, that thing could be useful. Good job, right? Which, of course, creates the problem of then she wants to bring it around and keep it with all the time because it might be useful again. So she kept spending a lot of her time creating stuff just to move all of the stuff that she insists on dragging everywhere. So she was useful sometimes and highly unuseful a lot of time. But it was a fun character, and it was a lot of fun, and the players all get a huge kick out of it. Matter of fact, it turned into like one of the weirdest, stupidest subplots, which was the kind of care and taking of the mad scientist, the Junker, who has no real footage in reality. So like they'd have to like decide who's going to explain to the Junker that they're going to leave half of her stuff behind, because that's not going to go well. Who's going to stay behind and watch the Junker who's now twinkling around in the back, right? And they actually had such a fun time with managing the Junker that it was almost like we couldn't get rid of that character, because the joke became that that's what kept the party together. It wasn't that any one of them had any real love for any of the other characters necessarily, but all of them had kind of bonded with this inane Junker that apparently should never be left to its own devices, because it's surprising that it wasn't dead when they found it, right? And she would always come up with, like I said, and then it's we're going to plant flowers, right? We're going to go do this thing. No, we don't want to help them right now. We want to go do the other thing. But we should help them. We should find all the ghosts and put them to rest. We don't have time to find all the ghosts and put them to rest. And you know what they did? Spent 6 months out of character. I think it was like 6 weeks in game, finding all the ghosts in this house to put them to rest. The GM left his ass off. This thing should have taken like a 1 hour, a 3-hour session. No, took almost 6 months. But Chaos Monkey, she was kind of her own little chaos monkey, but great fun, good story, and it goes into the type of players and characters. And I also think it depends on how it's done. Like, Don, you said that you don't care for that type of the play, and so I'm kind of curious. And I know that for Todd, he's doing a lot of old school stuff where that's not even a possibility. Like, it's just not how the old school games are ran. Is there a reason you guys don't like that type of play?
I think it's just a matter of, I don't know if I've played I spent a long time playing in a totally homebrew sci-fi game where we essentially invented all our own technology. We would hand write-ups to to the guy who's the GM of the game, and we totally made our own stuff to run with. So as long as we could make it fit and build on top of stuff we already had, and obviously using kind of crazy sci-fi isms, but somehow that there was consistent logic with it, we could make it work. So I don't have a problem with it in general. I think it's all about kind of what kind of game we're playing. The games that I sort of gravitate to, at least to run, are more, I guess, down and dirty than that. But I could see having a lot of fun playing in some kind of, fantasy or apocalyptic thing or something where you have kind of people MacGyvering stuff. As long as it fits in the scale and scheme of what we're doing. Like, if you're going to find people facing off against an army, then you have to allow kind of solutions like that. Otherwise, there's no.
And the army was not the
there.
first. Was not even a big. It was much later into things. But yeah. How about you, Don?
So our core games tend to be epic fantasy or heroic fantasy. So Castles and Crusades, core D&D. So there's not a lot of room for that. Our other games run the gamut. So like I was thinking when you were talking about creating lawnmowers, that we had a what are they called, jacker in Shadowrun, like 4th ed, 3rd ed.
The ones that jack in and just stay out. It's the variant on the Decker from old school, I think.
Yep. And his specialty was taking over like normal appliances like vacuum cleaners and such and using them to attack people.
See, and I think that's awesome. So the original plan before the lawnmower, which was argued about, was she just wanted to create basically a shield, because she could do shields, right? But basically it would be a bubble, and instead of keeping things out, it would keep all of them in. So it would be like a giant glass, and you just put it over their army, and then they couldn't do any harm. They just like that, just put a glass over them. And it was a huge argument that, well, you can't just put a glass over them. They're not a spider. And she's like, well, tell me how they're not a spider. We don't like spiders. Well, I don't like spiders. And so I'll just put a glass over it.
For me.
Yeah. Well, that was a huge argument on why you can't do that. And she never did. The character never did grasp the why we can't do that. But yeah, oh my gosh, the attacking with devices reminds me, World of Darkness in Changeling, at least in New World of Darkness Changeling, had basically like a elementalist. So you could be like a metal elementalist, which would allow you to animate objects. So you could animate the wiring in a building or animate a vehicle, right? So much crazy fun with that. You know, the dishwasher doesn't like you. It thinks you should rinse your dishes, you know, stuff like that. Just have these odd conversations. The worst, I think, that ever happened with the metal elementalist was she got a hold of a box of grenades and convinced them to kind of fuse together into one creature kind of thing. Pseudo-sentient, think as smart as a dog, maybe. And then told this literal rolling bomb, like wad of grenades to follow this guy and go where he tells you to, and then when he says the word, then you get to blow up. It was a hilariously interesting solution, and at the same time, you're just sitting here going, "Oh my god, that's horrid!" Like,
what? Real world, not RPGs. You know the meme.
Right.
You know the.
In an RPG, this is hilarious.
Well, you know the meme that's been going around for a couple of years now with I shot the toaster because it was a Decepticon is basically
right.
The point of the meme.
The new version of a mimic. Yes, I love those.
Yeah, I have 2 Shelties. These dogs are convinced our toaster is a Decepticon. So if you push,
how do you know it's not?
If you push the toast down, the dogs start freaking out, and then they sit and stare at it and growl. And when it pops up, they run around in circles barking to warn us. One of them actually tried to pull my youngest away from the toaster.
I want to know how you know that it actually is not a Decepticon.
It might be.
The dog could be right. Dogs are smart. I'm just saying.
Yep. Man, my money's on the dog.
Yeah, I'm with the dog on this. I think that toaster is possessed by evil, and you should get rid of it and get a new toaster. And see if the dog acts the same way. See? Now that would be science.
We have a gluten-free person in the household has celiac disease, so we have to have 2 toasters. But they're the exact same brand and model. And the dogs act the same for both of them, so maybe they're both the same. Well,
you know, that actually happened. You remember like the one that was a boombox that had the cassette? I think at one point, didn't they have 2 cassettes
Soundwave.
that were? Yeah.
Yep.
Didn't they have
one
2
was
or
a
was it just
dog
the one?
and one was there was 2. One was
yeah,
a
there's
dog,
2. Yeah.
One was
See?
there might have even been a third one. I think one was like a little guy.
Yeah.
One was
that would turn into a tape. Yeah.
And one of them was a dog.
Thank you. There you go. Obviously, still Decepticon.
Old school Soundwave. My favorite Transformer was old school Soundwave.
I think I disstated myself a lot, and so did Todd because he knew what I was talking about.
Absolutely, I had the toy. I had the toy.
What do you mean had? Had?
I wish
that's
I
not
still had
downstairs because
No,
mine's
I
downstairs.
I wish I still. I
don't
wish
have
still
the
had
tape
it.
anymore, though. I think
If
I
I
just
could find it at a yard sale or somewhere, I would totally snap it up.
I
again.
think. Oh God, yeah, but I don't think I've seen those. Like the only place I see them anymore is at like collectible comic game toy shops, and yeah, I don't want to talk about the price tag of those.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
All right. Shazam!
I was gonna say that like my game's kind of being sort of old school sort of OSR stuff. Like I totally am into like crazy stuff. It's just that the craziness can't quite compete with the making of a giant, tractor with the seed spreader.
Okay.
They just don't have those tools available.
Well, okay. So I had never gotten to play original, like I started with AD&D, right?
Right. Yep.
And so Pex was running a game and he let me play. And I was so thrilled to actually get to play in an original because I have pamphlets. I have pamphlets and all sorts of stuff, but I've never gotten to play. And so before then, I had been on because I've been on several of the podcasts, right? And there was a guy, and he kept discussing, because there was a conversation, and I think it was about do you kill off player character? Do you let a dice roll just kill a player character, right?
Yeah.
And I have very kind of, one, it should be discussed and how we want that, because I started gaming past that initial phase, right? And for me, tabletop games has always been an exercise in group storytelling. The game is that we as a group are telling a story, right? And so if we as a group are like, no, I don't want you to just willy-nilly kill off characters because that's somebody's character, then I don't think that that's how we should play. But the one guy was talking about things, and he kept referring to it like in Monopoly, who cares if you go to jail? And I'm like, because in Monopoly, I didn't spend, time creating the thimble. Like, the thimble's just the one I grabbed out of the box. Who cares? It wasn't until I got to play Pex's game that I see that that's where you started, or you play outside of that style. I can see why he compares it to Monopoly. Like, there's no reason to even get attached to the character. Like, you roll the dice, you roll them in order. You don't decide if you're an elf or not, really. It just kind of depends on where the dice rolls. So you don't have much invested in that character, which is very different, I think, than much more. And in some cases, somebody crazy comes up with the lawnmower of doom, seed spreading destruction, whatever we want to call it, right? But it is a very different play style, and
sure.
So I'm very curious on the people who, because I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with, or that it wasn't a fun game. Don't get me wrong there. But I'm kind of curious on the people who stuck with that style versus some of the more modern, more story-driven. Because, I mean, I guess story-driven isn't a good way of putting it. That's not...
I can say for myself.
Yeah.
Like, for me, the attachment comes as you are surviving. If you do survive, that's where your attachment rolls in, right? So in the last game that I played, I think it was a Swords and Wizardry game. I was playing somebody else's game, and I rolled up a guy, and my stats were kind of not that great. So I picked a halfling thief, because I think in that version, halflings were pretty limited. I think they could only be thieves, or anyway, or there was other classes were much more limited. So I picked the halfling.
That's probably because a lot of those, if you're a halfling, you're a thief. If you're an elf, you're this.
Right. This one, the version he was playing, you weren't locked in, so it wasn't racist class per se, but it had some of the other kind of limits. Like, okay, you're a halfling as a fighter, you can only go up to 4th level, this, that, or the other. So I went with the more open-ended one, which is a thief. But at that point, like, I've made this character, and just in general, like, I'm not a huge backstory. I play a lot of guys, like, and this guy was no exception. It was someone who, like, you know what, he just wanted to kind of see the world, so he just kind of went out and started just kind of doing like a walking tour of these places, and whatever happened kind of happened, sort of thing. So this guy, not great stats. Probably, I think a lot of people would have wanted to re-roll them. I don't even know. I think I maybe had only 2 stats above 12, or maybe 12 was my high roll. But as he adventured, and this was with a bunch of players who I was the only one who had played kind of old school gaming before, and basically our second combat was a near TPK where only my guy survived because no one would listen to me about, like, let's hunker down and in defensive positions, and they just wanted to charge out sortie against the great enemy, and the great enemy kind of cut them down like chaff. And so my guy, who was the only one who was kind of behind cover, was able to kind of keep this sort of MacGuffin that we had on us and just run away. And that was kind of the moment where it sort of cemented my character. I sort of had the idea of now who this guy was. He was someone who had been sort of happy-go-lucky, had sort of fallen in to kind of earn some extra money since he was just kind of traveling around, ended up getting in a really bad scene, watched his friends all butchered, and now he'd kind of developed a sort of cynicism. And that was kind of how that guy developed. And I had to leave the game just for scheduling things, but he had survived all the way, I think, to 5th or 6th level. And that's kind of how it worked. And obviously at 1st level, I would not have cared. Maybe I would even been grateful if he had died, just because then maybe I could roll somebody else up that I like more. But as he had survived things and been through the meat grinder and survived, then that came that thing of no, I want this guy to live. Let's see what I can do. I always feel like the challenge for me in those games is, what can I do with this hand I've been dealt? Right? I don't get to craft sort of an Adonis or Superman character. I have, Shemp from the Three Stooges. Let's see how far I can get Shemp. And maybe I feel like I'll win if I can get to like King Shemp with his stronghold. If I can get there,
And I
like I'll
can
feel
see
like that was
that
my win.
if you get one that can continue. But like there was one guy who I think had died at the end of the last session, made a character, it died, made another character that session, and it died.
Totally.
And
But
so
you
it's
can
like
make them
you
fast.
don't even get attached. And so that was the whole. I can see where he equated this to Monopoly, because your character could easily have died 2-3 times in a game.
Absolutely. And that's where like you don't, and that's why I feel like you don't even worry about stuff like backstory or kind of reasons when you just let them at least survive a session or 2 or 3 or get a level.
Right.
But I think the game's kind of right. The game sort of ramps you like that, because when you get to kind of mid levels, then you start to be able to have access to things like resurrection, so that you can keep those guys around longer. Right. So you go from like there's very little survivability and one hit could very possibly kill you and life is cheap, to then, okay, your third, your fourth, fifth, sixth level. Now you have means of keeping these guys who you've established, and you have ways, at least some easier ways of keeping them alive. But yeah, it's totally different than like the times where I see people online who have spent months crafting a character that they've just got. And, that would be terrible for them if they walked in to session 1 with this person they've just been talking about and painstakingly building for weeks and weeks or months, and then they get just wiped out in the first, like what happened to one of the characters in my old school game. Got bitten by a spider and died. In the first real dungeon they went into, a spider dropped down from the ceiling and bit them, and it was poisonous. They failed their save, and I had tweaked this poison system a little bit so it was more of a lingering death than the instant death. But basically, they were dying, and the rest of the party dragged them out of the cave, and they slowly expired while they went back in to do some more dungeon delving.
I play them all, and from DCC RPG, where you start out with enough characters to ensure that one of them survives the first level, through Amber. I mean, and to take an example that we've at least talked about a couple of times, more toward the Amber end, we play a fair amount of Earthdawn. Not a ton, but it's one of the games we enjoy after the
I appreciate that. You can talk about Earthdawn all day. Makes my boss happy. It's all good. Thank you.
I won't mention which edition we prefer then.
Shush at you. I will say, if you haven't given 4th edition a good shake, because I like 4th edition and I like what they've done with it.
Yeah.
And that's not even being biased, because they had started that before I had anything to do with the company. So, but go ahead. Tell us more.
So I actually enjoy them all. I mean, in DCC, your characters are all garbage and worse than 3d6 straight most of the time. And you just, the culling occurs and you end up with one that may not be the best one or the one you wanted. And while it seems odd to me as a GM, the players enjoy it. And, for Earthdawn, I've actually honestly received a 63-page history on how this character got to be first circle. So I think there's an enjoyable part to both styles of play. It just depends on the game system and what you're doing.
Yeah, you definitely have to be upfront as to what kind of game it is. Is it kind of life is cheap, or at least up until a point, whatever, or is it that these guys are the heroes of sort of a long story? Because you don't want to switch characters from one to the other, where you've got a guy who you just kind of rolled up randomly and let sit because life is cheap, and now you're in this one where this guy's expected to be your hero throughout the whole story, and you would have done things differently. And of course, you don't want the guy who's spending months creating and crafting a finely tuned character to come into a game where they may have a life expectancy of one encounter or less.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, well, and I think that goes back to that and things that we've already mentioned. It's the what do people want to play? What is the expectation for the game? What was the thought process going into it? Which I think is awesome. And I love that we have so many different, genres, spans, type, style. And nowadays, to a certain degree, it's even better, easier. We have things like Discord and we have Roll20 and things like that, where you have a particular type or style you like and you're having trouble finding people that match your time that you have open. You can now go on to places like this and be like, anybody play this who has time, right? and be playing with somebody who's on the other side of the world. There's a guy, and he's somewhere in, where did he say he was? It's like an Asian minor, like Malaysia or something like that. I can't remember what night now. That plays in the 1879 game. So like for the rest of us, it's 10 in the morning. For him, it's like 10, 11 o'clock at night until 2 in the morning. Like he's almost literally other side of the world.
Yeah,
I got to play 5th Ed with a guy who was jamming from Hong Kong. It's so cool that we have not just this whole span of different games and different types and styles, but that we now have opened up community-wise so that you can connect to people all over with it.
Yeah, we were doing it. We have masters in computer science, so we had our own server and everything set up way back when. And I don't know, 2003-ish, the time zone difference is what killed. We had a player from Australia playing with us every week. And the time zone difference is eventually what killed it because he was messing up school over playing with us.
Nah, that's a no-no.
Yep.
But yeah, as far as taking the two, I have met people who have taken 2, 3, 4 weeks plus to make characters, and it's always been like, I've never understood it. And I actually got I made some guy mad online on Twitter, which isn't all that hard, I guess. But something had been said, and I made a comment about this guy took 2, 3 weeks creating his character for a Shadowrun game. And it was a game that I wasn't planning on playing. A bunch of the guys were playing it, but I wasn't, time-wise, I didn't think I had time for it. And then something opened up, and I'm like, oh, and they're like, make a character, jump in. So I think it took me 15 minutes. I rolled up a character, said, boom, this is what I'm playing, whatever. And I was happier with my 15-minute put-together character than he was with the one he had taken weeks. Turned out we were both playing mages. We get stuck with the mages go sit in the car because you're squishy at this level, right? But mages in Shadowrun and First Ed, as long as you could see the area, you could basically still cast. And the storyline was something along the lines of, this gang over here doesn't like that gang, and we've been hired to tell that gang to back off the territory. Go make a statement, right? Well, there used to be a spell, something like Fire Cloud, which pretty much is exactly what it sounds like, right? So my mage is sitting over there going, and Fire Cloud. Now, our guys are in there. Yeah, they're probably going to be mad about it. But whatever. This definitely makes a statement, right? Y'all stay off our turf because we're crazy enough. We'll blow up our own people. There. Right? This guy gets mad because he felt like I was trying to shame, I guess, the other guy who'd taken so long to make his character. And it was like, well, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just that there are different styles and that no matter what, you may or may not like how things turn out because they're, and he just kept latching onto this whole, because I, said that I had taken so long to make it. And he's like, it's not like, other people have worked for the company. I'm like, dude, I did not work for the company back in First Ed Shadowrun. Like I've worked for the company for 2 years. We don't even own Shadowrun anymore. Like, what are you talking about? But it does go into kind of that whole back to the made characters. Like, I don't know that I really liked the character that I got as much because, it's just whatever got rolled, that's what my character is. The hilarious part is I went out and I paid the money to get a retainer who got, it was randomly rolled, right? I absolutely liked the retainer character, though, who died 2 episodes in, two sessions in, the retainer guy died. 2, 3. It's like, oh, but he was my favorite character.
I'm going to go, ooh, butterfly, and go, how often does it happen that an NPC ends up being a PC? In my games, it's not uncommon. It doesn't happen all the time, but I've had players fall in love with an NPC. I've had players
and then decide that they want to play the NPC?
Yeah, when their character dies, they'll be like, hey, can I play so-and-so? And apparently, because I've let it happen in the past, it happens more at my table. It's not all the time, but I would say...
No, but I've never had it happen. That's cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the player who died of the spider bite ended up playing the character of their retainer, who really? I guess I had just played well and was kind of just a cool character there. So yeah, that's awesome. I had given the option of hey, do you want to work on a character or we've got these retainers, and he jumped on it. He said, no, I'll just take over that person. So he did. Yep.
So the closest I've ever had, and I've had this happen a lot, which is a throwaway NPC. I need this NPC to depart this little bit of information or whatever, and then it's going to get hit by... I literally had one in a World of Darkness game that was going to die. The character was never supposed to go anywhere. It was just an NPC that was supposed to do some stuff and literally was supposed to be hit by a bus. you would not believe how much effort these people went to save this thing from being hit by a bus. Only, I'm dead serious. Like they actually, the thing ends up in a coma, and they actually pay all the medical bills so that they can keep an eye on and spy on this character, this stupid NPC that was never supposed to amount to anything. They paid all of the hospital bills so that they could continue to watch, because they were convinced that this NPC was some big bad. Now I've had that. Like they've turned a bar wench into something really important type of thing.
Oh yeah, in 7th C we had, one of the brutes turned out that the party wanted to turn him into some big bad guy in their heads. So eventually he evolved into that just because they wouldn't quit talking about it.
Right? Like now that I totally like. Why are you guys attached to this thing? Like what about that NPC? Because you can design an NPC and be like, this is something they should totally latch onto, right? And they won't give it 2 thoughts. And then you could have some throwaway one that you just came up with the name of the last waitress that you saw a name tag on, right? Or something. And that will somehow be the most important NPC. And now it is a big bad because I guess they made it that way, right? Like that I've had, but I've never even considered. I think that's a really cool thing, though, to have somebody pick up an NPC as a now player character. That is really neat.
Yeah, what's funny is in the story of this PC who died to the spider bite, they dragged his body out, and one of the other retainers, I decided to have him make a morale check, because basically the party dragged out their fallen comrade and just left them there to kind of bloat and die while they went back in the dungeon. So I rolled a morale check, and the retainer failed. So they had actually been hired by that character. So when they saw the character just kind of die there, they decided, you know what, I'm going to take my cut of what I feel like I'm owed. I'm going to take one of the horses, and I'm bailing. So they left. Then the player then took over that NPC, the other retainer, and it became this whole thing where they took over the one retainer who became their character. Then the other retainer who left became like bad guy number 1, and became this whole subplot of them trying to track down this guy they feel like had wronged them, and abandoned them. Whereas that character, I felt like that NPC was like, look, my boss, you didn't even try to cure his poison. You found he was poisoned. He's dying. You just dragged him out, laid him down, and left him. Like, I was like, he was horrified. So it's kind of funny that I had both the NPC turning into a villain and the NPC turn into a PC kind of in the same moment in that instance.
I had one that was under mind control and was attacking the party, and as soon as they did dispel magic to stop it, he looked at one of the characters and said, "I almost killed you," when she was clearly beating his rear in the fight before that. And that one line turned us into a favorite NPC of the party forever, and it was just a guy who was caught in mind control and being used.
That's awesome.
All right. Shazam!
All right, so the Grasshopper has a question, or thing wants to talk about best practices for how to mesh different personalities. I have a group now where someone of one age bracket, Pokemon player who wants, oops, it's hard for me to see 2 things. Inkling characters in traditional settings with other types without throwing players away. I'm not sure what an Inkling character
I had to
is,
ask.
but I guess.
So,
okay. Oh yeah, I'm reading.
So it seems like it's some sort of more like a cartoony, because he compared it to Mario Kart, or Mario Paint. So I know what Mario is, but I don't know what Mario Paint is. But Mario being the Nintendo guy, so I get that. So I guess the gist is that somebody who wants a much more cutesy, more, I'm guessing, playful, cartoonish character versus the guy who's old school playing oh goodness, I am a fighter, I am a paladin, serious gamer. So how do you get the playful to mix with the much more serious without, because he's right, you don't want to discourage that passion for an interest, because we want young players involved. I mean, that's a good thing.
So my core game. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my core game is currently Castles and Crusades, and the age range runs from 11 to almost 60. And needless to say, there's a big difference in play styles and influences in there, and the 11-year-old definitely fits the Pokemon type player. And the way that I've addressed it and have in the past with similar disparities in age in just about every edition is with the character background. The 11-year-old has a special class no one knows about that he's trying to take care of while he's with the party doing the party thing, and that gives him something to do that is fun and in line with what he's looking for without derailing all the players that want a different style game.
So my first thing would be, because I've had similar stuff with younger, but it wasn't so much it wasn't so much that they wanted something cartoonish. Like I had one who had only really done video games, had never really done tabletop gaming. And video games, please notice, I like video games. I'm not knocking video games, but they're, especially modern video games, are much faster paced than tabletop gaming. And if you've mostly played like con style or pre-written module where it's go scene to scene to scene versus a more open world, no, you tell me what you're doing. I'm not telling you where you're going. I need you to tell me what you're doing. That he had trouble with the pacing. If it was more like he's having a hard time getting that character versus the much more vanilla type of things, part of it is I would be curious on what his character sheet says he's playing and how he picked that. Because sometimes the best thing to do with inexperienced ones is not to start with, what do you want to play? As far as, tell me you're an elf and you're a rogue, ranger, whatever. It's, tell me about who your character is. The character in your mind, who are they? What caused them to be there? Basically, give me the background. And then we'll build your character sheet around that background. Because if everyone thinks that you're the rogue and then you're not doing rogue shit and they expected the rogue to do rogue shit, it can be frustrating because nobody took anything in that skill set because your dude's the rogue. Traditional party lines being that, I, the fighter, will go do the fighter tanky shit. You, the rogue, go and open the goddamn box and make sure that I don't get my head blown off because of the trap, right? So I would have maybe started with something in that range of, so what is it? And so then at that session 0, you could be like, well, he's a rogue, but he's not a trap-finding rogue. So that they would then know not to expect that role from that character. If it's more along the lines of he wants that video game mechanic, speed, timing that's so very like fast that just doesn't happen, then you have to go into a couple of other things like, is it that he's bored in between? Is it that he's trying to gain all the attention? So I think Grasshopper can maybe, don't leave, because I'm trying to figure out, But yeah, so I think it goes into that. Like the one that we had, he just, so tell me more, like, is it that they think that he's a rogue and he's not doing rogue things, or they think he's a fighter and he's not doing fighter things? Or is it that he's having trouble with the pacing? Because video game pacing is very different. It's kind of like, you guys, because, okay, so I know Todd's at least as old as me. Did you ever watch old Doctor Who?
Absolutely. I was going to say one thing also is tone.
New Doctor
right?
Who, the timing, the episodes, and how the pacing is so very fucking different. That new people who only started with like the 9th Doctor or whatever have a really hard time watching like the original black and white stuff.
Yeah, I think the other thing is like tone. If you're trying to play
fighter and sits out of combat,
kind of
yeah,
like Conan, and they're trying to play Pokemon, that's really hard to mesh those because the Conan players are not really going to want to go into Pokemon country, and the Pokemon players probably not going to want to go into Conan country. So if it's that, like, that's a really hard thing to do. And I would almost say, like, if it's your kid, like, spin off a session and play with them separately to get their Pokemon fix.
In this one, in all truth, if he's a fighter but he doesn't want to do combat, I would say he needs a different character.
Well, if you look,
I would start with, what is it that you think your character should be doing? What is it that your character is? Who is your character? What's the character doing?
Yeah, maybe they shouldn't be a fighter, and you can kind of subtly just give them a new class, and maybe even give a heads up to the other players that, like, hey, they.
I don't know that I'd even do it subtly. Like, I'd just be like, because I think that there should always be an openness and discussion at tables, and I think that a lot of times GMs forget to do that. So we've
Well, I
noticed
just meant
that
as far
things
as
are.
not like killing characters and making a
Oh
new
no,
one,
no,
just
but
like
you don't have
going
to
in and
kill the
switching
character.
out
The
that.
character could just
Just
go
swap
off
out
into
the
the
class
woods.
for an, or just I was thinking even just swap out the classes. Like if he's been doing stuff that's more roguish, but he's
Well,
class
and you
as a
could do
fighter,
that.
just swap out
Just,
the
I would
fighter
talk to
class for a rogue.
Don.
You know.
What were
Yeah.
you going to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say if you look at the race for it, the Inkling, that might be a tough fit in any campaign, and maybe it's that. I mean, if it's a relative, it's tough to say you can't, you don't belong here. But it might be best to tell them you need to find a different table if they're not a relative, just because what they're looking to do wouldn't fit with people who are looking for traditional roles, because the
Yeah, and just to
concept is
add,
out there a
And
ways.
just
and
to
I
add,
get that,
D&D
but I
Wiki
understand
is a
him not
terrible
wanting to
source.
crush the player if they're a newbie and young.
Just to
And
add
if
though,
you say things like
be
you
very
need a
careful
different
with
table,
D&D
could be
Wiki.
crushing.
Yeah, I was
D&D
gonna
Wiki,
say D&D Wiki is. I was iffy the minute I
man.
saw the link.
If you're running a game and your one of your players brings you a custom classes from D&D Wiki, that's pretty much already enough for me to say, like, let's find another source or we'll figure something out ourselves, because that stuff is famous for being incredibly imbalanced and super powered and everything. So what I would probably do is if I had someone said, hey, I want to play this Inkling, and they shoot me a D&D Wiki link, is I'll say, well, we're not doing D&D Wiki, but maybe we can tear this up and find out, and like Andy was saying, what are the core things of this, this character that you want? Like when you think of this Inkling Pokemon, like what are its real highlight abilities? And let's figure out how we can make those work.
Is
And
it
maybe there's even stuff
catching
in existing
monsters,
classes
and
and
then
races.
maybe a ranger would be better? Yeah, see, I would want to know more like what he thinks it is, and I'm going to agree with Todd. If your character class comes from a wiki anything, my answer was probably no.
Yep.
Unless that's what everybody at the table wanted to do.
Well, and D&D Wiki in particular has a history and a reputation of, if it was too powerful, it ended up there.
Yeah, it's just famous for just terrible stuff. Like
Again,
there may be some gems on D&D
if
Wiki
everybody
that are not
wanted it, maybe,
terrible.
but
yeah, I would
still
say
want to read through it
find the
carefully.
highlights.
Yeah, I'm gonna be just point blank. How old, and is this person a relative? Like, is it somebody who it's your nephew? Is it a 12-year-old? What are we? Because I do agree, and I understand I do not want to discourage new young players. So very young.
Yeah, you have to find the game that's right for them. When they're first starting out, like with my daughter, the kind of stuff she's going to do is not going to fly with a bunch of middle-aged gamers. So I wouldn't put the pressure on either one of those groups. Like I wouldn't want to take her to a game where I feel like they're going to have these expectations of how she should be, and I don't want to do that. So like what I was saying, asking Don at the very beginning of like his Tales of Equestria experience, like I would totally play Tales of Equestria. I would totally play like, hey, if this boy's 11 or 10 years old and they want to do a D&D Wiki Inkling, then I'll just play a solo game with them where they can be an Inkling and it can just be overpowered, crazy BS.
I've seen it done. I've had people who brought their kid into a game and it's worked out perfectly fine.
Agreed.
Usually, though, that is we're letting, Sue's daughter play. Heck, one of them, it was a World of Darkness game. So certain things got kind of cutscene that may not have been cutscened without Sue's daughter there, type of thing. But okay, it can work, but everybody at the table has to have a certain amount of, we're giving some lax to, because we've agreed that she could play. So it gets a little kind of everybody's in on we're letting the 12-year-old play because we want to encourage this 12-year-old to play, right? Yeah, and so they're all willing to give that kind of, foot to foot because it's so-and-so's kid, right? That's usually the only time it works out. But then the entire table has to be okay with giving that type of laxitude.
And it helps the closer that the child or this other player, their vision is to what you're playing. Like if you're playing World of Darkness, everyone's playing vampires, and they really want to play a vampire, that works. Like if you get into, hey, we're playing World of Darkness, the players are playing vampires, like, well, I want to be Wonder Woman. It's like, well, that doesn't necessarily
but that's
work
not an option. And so I think that's the next thing is that, okay, I think that you should talk to him that I think when he gets a chance, if he goes back and listens, that the wiki, that's a no. And just simply say, hey, this is one of the things that we learn in life, which is sometimes you try something and it doesn't work out, and that we as the group at the table discuss that didn't work out.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
That's part of being an adult and things like that. This isn't working out. It's not really meshing well with the game and the story that we're trying to run. So we need to discuss what type of character that you want to play will fit better into the story, because this is an exercise in group storytelling. So your character needs to fit into the group story.
Yeah, and that's kind of a learned thing, I think, for everybody, right? For players to finding the game that they really want. Like a lot of times when you're starting out, you
adult
think
players.
You know the kind of game you want. Anybody, really. Age, not a factor. Like, you may think you want a game like X, but you really want a game like Y. You just don't know it yet. And as a GM, same thing. Like, you may think, oh, I just want to run this kind of game. But your idea of what that kind of game is in your brain is not really the same as what that kind of game actually is.
I have been GMing for like 2.5 decades, something like that. I still will occasionally come up with what I think is a great idea for a story, and I will throw it at the wall being the table, and it will fall completely flat. Like, just oh wow, yeah, no, that did not work out at all like I thought that would.
I get that more with game systems, but yeah, it happens with game ideas too. But I'll say we should do a Saturday of just this, and people will be like, "What are you, nuts?" I'm like, "No, really, it'll be a great game.
No, it'll be fun." Or I'll try something and it doesn't work well with a system, but worked really well with a different system, or even
the group is not the right group.
The group is
it may work well with a different group, but your group, it doesn't work.
We had a guy who ran L5R, Legend of the Five Rings, right? And he had apparently ran this story for another group, and he thought this was such a great story, and we're all going to love it. We make our characters. We start. The general thing that we're told at the beginning is that we have been hired by, the Emperor, or told by the Emperor, not really hired because it's L5R. The Emperor said, go do this thing, right? We're supposed to get all of the bad people out of this village. So we circle around the village and we basically burn everything to the ground, and anybody who runs out, we kill. Now there are no bad people in the village. And in L5R, this is actually a viable solution because villagers are peasants, and okay, so we killed some peasants. They don't care. And the guy was really mad at us because the last time he had ran this, it took them 2 years of investigation and research and questioning people. And we had just basically leveled the entire village and said, cool, we're done. Now what? Right.
This is my 2-year campaign.
Yeah. Oh God.
He was 10 minutes.
Yes. It was more than 10 minutes, but yeah. So that apparently was not the right story for that table. I've had it happen myself. Put together something for a con that you're going to run like 4 times at this con and twice at that con. And everybody's solution's very different. Every table's very different about it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it didn't work so good.
It's always interesting to see like what the solution you think players are going to come up with and what they actually do. It's kind of funny. Sometimes it just kind of blows my mind.
I love it when they come up with shit I never thought of. Like, I love that. But
all right.
I think that his best advice is going to be that he needs to talk to the young person and talk to him like an adult and be like, hey, so here's the thing. I love how enthusiastic you are. I love that you want to play, and I want to encourage that. But part of playing and being involved is that this is an exercise in group storytelling. And your character isn't suited to the story that we're telling. So let's discuss creating a character that's more suited. And also discuss with the rest of the table about a certain amount of leeway for age. And if they don't want that leeway, like if they're uninterested, which can happen, Don may be absolutely right, and that he may have to not be at that table, which is not the best solution in the fact that then it would be discouraging. So I would much rather see, I have this other table over here.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of thinking. Is like, just take that player aside and say, let's play your Pokemon. Because if it's just him and me, and I'm not worried about stuff, like, let's just play an Inkling game. You and I, let's get some dice. Let's do it. But for this other thing that maybe doesn't fit over there, but we can make it work. right? Just
Right.
maybe in a different way than the original.
Well, I mean, I've had
intention.
adults. Every now and then you get someone who you like as a person, but they have to have that character who's the super me character, min maxi. My character has to be in charge guy, and that can be fine as long as you don't have two of them on the same table, or as long as the table doesn't really hate that particular, right? So I've had some where I've like moved one of them to a different table just so that two of them aren't butting heads, or to a table where that table won't mind so much, or where the table's more experienced and they're really good at just kind of skirting that type of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think role playing is like anything else. Like you can have friends, they don't all have to be fits for your table. Just like there are things that you may do with one group of friends and then you do something else with another group of friends. And, friends that you may go and want to go to concerts with, there are other friends you may want to go drinking at bars with. They don't have to be, you don't have to feel like everybody has to fit. Like you have to, at some point, you have to figure out that maybe these guys that you love, but they're just not great for one reason or another, either fits for you or, your table or you at their table, whatever. And just know that, hey, we don't have to do this together and we could still be friends. It doesn't have to be like an all or nothing, because we don't play D&D or whatever together that like we're not friends anymore. So it's like, hey, you know what? This is my friends that I do this with, and I'll do something else with you guys. You're not on I don't play pickup basketball with you, but we can do something else, kind of thing.
Well, and I think that,
but it can be hard because everything gets wrapped up with emotion.
I like the fact that he's trying really hard because since it's a young person,
yeah, totally.
I appreciate the effort that he's putting into to try to find a solution so that the young person doesn't feel.
I mean, I think the thing is, like,
outed,
I started playing. Yeah, I started playing when I was young too. I think the thing is I was playing with other kids my age, so we could do all kinds of crazy, wacky. I'm sure if there had been Pokemon at the time, we probably would have wanted to make Pokemon characters. But we were all playing with our own age group, so we could do that. Like, I can't imagine if I was trying to play and I was, I don't know, 8 or 9, 10 with a bunch of 30-year-olds or whatever. Like, it would have been. I probably would have felt really awkward, and I'm sure they might have felt a little bit. It just would have been a strange fit. Like, I think it's cool. That you get to do it, but I almost feel like in all this stuff that I miss sort of like let's just let some kids just go crazy with dice with some other kids and let them just have all that kind of fun without adults bringing them down. Or
a lot of times it's hard for them to find kids their age that are into it.
Yep.
Like mine got lucky. I ran a group and it was called Geeks in Training, and all they did was whatever geeky thing they wanted to do. Like they started 3X when they were about 9, So they had that built-in group of other kids to play with. So, but what happens when you hang out at the comic gaming store because that's what you're into, but there's not enough other little kids your age to do that?
Though I don't know if it's just me, but where I live, I'm in Brooklyn. There are like tons of like after-school stuff and programs for kids doing like role-playing games and board games and things like that. So maybe I'm just lucky, but there's a lot of outlets now for.
Part of that is because you're important.
Kids.
I was going to say Green Bay's population
I'm in the Midwest.
is 150,000. So
I'm in the Midwest. When I went,
I'm so jealous of these kids now too. They have so much access to stuff that I remember having to go so far into the weeds to try to get a hold of gaming stuff and find role playing stuff. And now
I
for them,
didn't know
it's just so
about
easy.
role playing games till college till I started. I started college early, but okay, because I was in a small town in Missouri. My graduating class was literally 26 people.
Wow,
so
I thought that was in a small town.
I mean, yeah. So
I got you.
And he was talking about a museum in Oklahoma. So it's very possible that he's out here in the Midwest where you don't have that. Like the libraries are just now out here trying to make sure that they have comics in, because it turns out, did you know people like comics? Like it's not quite just now, but they're just, Okay, I live in a town of over 20,000. We finally got a library last year. Finally got a library, and it's 20,000 people in this town. Yeah. So it actually can be, I think, harder depending on where you're at.
Well, I think.
Go ahead, Don.
I think, going back a little bit, is player selection. I guarantee you that the My Little Pony game run by the 11-year-old did not get invitations from some of my best players did not get invitations to that table.
And they thank you for that, because I would not be interested.
Right. And so
I think it's awesome that we have things like that.
Yep.
The Pugmire, and there's a cat one now too. I don't remember the name of the cat one.
Yeah, and
it's the RPG where you play different breeds of dogs. I don't know much else about it, and they have a cat one now. I don't necessarily have an interest. I will say I picked them up for a friend for presents because she'll love them, and she's an adult, but she will love them. I have a friend who her day job is she's a pet groomer, so she'll love it, right?
Oh yeah, Tales of Equestria for me is something to play with my daughter. But I know I was in one of the gaming stores a couple months ago, and the guy was like, "Well, I'm about to go off to play Tales of Equestria," and this was him and his totally a bunch of adult folks going and playing it. So I definitely know it has a. I mean, there's a whole adult My Little Pony following anyway. So,
well,
not necessarily for me.
If you've made fun of Rules Light, then you should not be sitting at a table for Tales of Equestria. It's designed for kids, so there are a total of 3 stats, and each stat is actually a die, so that you can just pick up the die and roll it to determine whether you have success or not. I mean, it really is that simple.
There's and I had recently learned about it. It's a game, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's similar in style. It was created to be played with like parents with 1 or 2 small children, as kind of like, instead of bedtime story, you could do this, or you could do it in the car. And like it's super rules light. Like the child would decide, I'm playing a bandit king who's really a T-Rex, and that's okay. And you ask, well, what is the bandit king really good at? And the child's supposed to name like 3 things, and that's the stats. And the entire story, kind of like Todd was talking about, just play with the one child, right? Let him be an inkling or whatever that is. And you basically just kind of follow the child's lead on, I guess, what the bandit king T-Rex does, right? Yeah. And I love that we're seeing things like that, though. I mean, 20 years ago, that wasn't even a consideration. Like that, nobody was thinking of those things. We have so many different options now, ranging from this one game where apparently it's so easy your 4-year-old can explain it to you, to, let's be honest, old school crunchy crunch things. I mean, even Earth Dawn 4th Ed is considered super crunchy by some.
Though I think a lot of things we were doing, like I remember in high school. So I went to high school overseas. My graduating class was 8, and I ended up playing a lot of role playing games, kind of one-on-one. And I remember me and a guy, we would take turns GMing with our characters becoming NPCs, NPC kind of partners of the other character. And we started playing, I think it was Twilight 2000, but it morphed into some sort of dimension traveling magic, whatever. We just kind of took everything and just mushed it together to some kind of crazy, and we just took like we liked, and we just kind of liked the Twilight 2000 thing from the start. But I don't know, we ended up doing all kinds of crazy stuff where we had like He-Man, Battle Cats were in the mix, like all kinds of wacky whatever stuff. So, I think it just wasn't so much about what rules. We didn't have rules to support us. We just the rules were less important. Whereas now it's great that you have the rules that can support all this kind of crazy stuff, and you don't necessarily have to try to. Though we never wondered about, well, how are we going to do this? I don't even remember the kind of mechanics we used when we ran into stuff that wasn't covered by one rule set or the other, but we just managed it. But it is nice that you have things that you can do now and feel like you have the mechanical support backbone there if you want it.
The rules were always, because the first and golden rule of all gaming is that the rules are there to be useful and helpful. If a rule's not useful and helpful, get it off your table, right?
Yep.
Rules were there to make sure that there wasn't any of the arguing over, let's be honest, what are they calling it? Mary Sue, min-max, my character can now suddenly do God power X. Like, it was to stop that behavior.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I get it. Like I said,
and if you had a good group of friends,
they
weren't doing that anyhow.
Having to deal with it.
And it sounds like you grew up with a good group of friends that weren't trying to, come up with the new godlike power to be better than everybody else. So, right. And that's fabulous. But I like the fact that we have so much diversity now.
Oh no, I love it. This is really a golden age for gaming.
Geeks,
where you can go
gaming. all
anyway,
of it.
it's about noon, and
Yep.
I have to go right on time. So let's wrap up. If you want to, give yourself an outro, and if you have any other links to drop them. I guess we'll
I'm just
go in
re-dropping
reverse.
mine.
No, yep, and
There you
that's fine. Why don't you go first, since you were last starting?
I'm still just Andy. I'm not sure why you guys keep letting me come on, hang out, but I appreciate it. Links. Don's
Thanks,
turn.
yay. Don, you got any
Nice
outro
meeting you,
you
Don.
wanna?
Nice meeting you. I still just Don, since I'll follow Andy's lead. Hellbar Games, check us out. Everybody who talks to us, having played our modules, loves them, which means everybody who didn't talk to us probably doesn't. But that's okay.
Yes, but see, now I know somebody who has a computer and knows about Castles and Crusades, so I might actually get to play because I have a stack like you would not believe of Castles and Crusades stuff that's sitting around that I don't get to play.
Yeah, I actually gave some away because I just wasn't getting around to using it.
I like to read it. I've met some of the guys who are with Castles and Crusades. I'm friends with at least one guy who sells some of the stuff, and I bump into them at conventions, and they cut me a great deal on books, and I end up walking away with stacks of things that one day I hope to actually do more than collect dust with.
Yeah,
I would love to play it.
Maybe we can have a chat just about like games we haven't played that we want to play.
Oh.
Anyhow, I'm just Todd, and thanks everybody people who came in to listen, and and obviously folks who watch it when I get it pushed up. I'm gonna have to. Had some trouble with Craig, so I'll have to see if I'll have to stitch together the audio. But everybody have a great rest of your Sunday. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you at the next one.